Are you still breathing? If so, and hopefully you still are, then congratulations, you have fulfilled the first priority of survival. Your next priority is maintaining your core body temperature, and your clothing is your first line of defense for this. So what's the simplest, most useful item of clothing you can think of? Well, for me, it'd probably be some sort of big blanket. And my favourite big blanket is known as the Great Kilt, or the belted plaid.
Perhaps the most iconic Scottish garment, and through centuries of its use, it's become a symbol of Highland culture and identity. But beyond its interest and cultural significance, the main thing that fascinates me is just how simple, multifunctional, and useful it is as an outdoor garment, with many stories and legends of Highland warriors and drovers surviving the harsh Scottish environment with not much more than their faithful Faily Moors. Since starting my Highlander survival series, I've been testing out and experimenting with this mighty cloth on hikes and multi-day expeditions. Comparing these experiences with modern day survival knowledge and equipment has made me learn a lot about the second most important thing. In this video, I'll explore in depth what we can learn from the wildlife around us, our ancestral cloth, and how this applies to effective layering of clothing in general. I'll discuss what the humble plaid can teach us about simplicity, multifunctionality, and sustainability of resources. Finally, I'll share all the ways I've found to use it and wear it so far. And using high quality wool fabric made in the UK, I'll have some fun testing out its thermal qualities and camouflage. Can you see me here?
So, stay tuned.
So this video took a ton of work and research, and it genuinely wouldn't have been possible without the support of the Great Courses Plus, and I actually believe in what they're offering. After the will to keep going, knowledge is the second most useful thing in life, and the Great Courses Plus offer a mass of backed up knowledge and one convenient subscription. Think of it like the Netflix of learning. It's a subscription-based, on-demand video learning service, and through your subscription, you get access to a massive library of over 11,000 video lectures about pretty much anything that interests you, from science, math, history, literature, or even how to cook, play chess, or become a better photographer. Lessons are given by experts in the field from Ivy League universities or organisations like National Geographic, and content is updated monthly. Some courses I personally found valuable are Survival Mentality, the psychology of staying alive, Real Zen, for real life, Cooking across the ages, and The Meaning of Life, to name just a few. My favourite thing is you can download the audio of these lectures on your phone so you can learn while driving or doing other things. So you can try it out for free by going to thegreatcoursesplus.com/Fandabi Dozi, or click the link in the description below. Get yourself some knowledge and also help keep the channel going. Cheers. Now onto the video.
Hi folks, Tom from Fandabi Dozi and TomLanghorn.com. Thanks for tuning in. So, for those who are new to my channel, I mainly make videos about bushcraft and wilderness survival, often from a historical perspective. And one of my favourite things about this topic is it forces you to simplify life to its absolute basics, and it's the practice of continually stripping away the fluff until you're left with the bare bones of what you actually need to survive. In every experience, I take a step back in time in terms of tools and equipment. I learn something new that can be applied back to the everyday, whether it's skills on how to be a better outdoorsman in general, or a greater appreciation on how to better use the technology of the modern era. So with that in mind, why am I talking about the Great Kilt? Well, for me, it's the jack of all trades when it comes to clothing and simple shelter. And much like a good knife and a good stick, a good wool blanket has a beautiful reliability and multifunctional simplicity to it. So in this video, I want to use the Great Kilt to explore maintaining core body temperature in general, and how to simplify clothing from a survival perspective. So this video is mainly going to focus on those topics, but I know I'll get lots of questions on the history and culture of the plaid. So first of all, a quick historical summary. But if you want to learn more, please check out all my past videos. I've got a ton of them, and I'll link some learning resources in the description below. So, you ready? So it's referred to by many names, which gets a bit confusing. It's called the Great Kilt, the belted plaid, the plaid, the plaid, the brechine and ailey, the Faily Moor, the brechine and Faily, and there's probably some other names. And it's called a kilt because that's what I did to the last person who called it a skirt. Now the word kilt probably comes from an old English word, kiltin, which means to gather, which probably refers to the way you gather the pleats at the back of it when you wear it. But for this video, I'll mainly refer to it as the plaid or the plaid, as that's the shortest and easiest one for me to say. And these words come from the Gaelic plaidger, which means blanket. And that's all this really is, one big untailored blanket, 4 to 5 meters long and 1.5 centimeters wide, made from 100% medium to heavyweight wool fabric. So these were traditionally made with hand-spun wool yarn, woven and hand looms that were only about 75 centimeters wide, so that you could pass the horizontal threads with your hands. So what people in the Highlands generally used to do was make one long bit of cloth, about 9 yards long, cut it in half, and then sew it lengthways so you would have a shorter, wider blanket. So the plaid probably evolved from people generally using a blanket or a cloak as a rain cover, and over the passage of time they seem to get larger and larger to the point that between the 15th and 18th century men wore it as their main outer garment in the style that you see me wearing it in my videos. Now the women of the Highlands wore something similar known as the erisade, which is the same idea, a big multifunctional wool blanket, but it was worn in different ways as an outer garment over a dress. Now I'll do a more detailed video on the erisade in a future video, but some of the uses I'll show today can be applied to the erisade. It was just typically a bit shorter than the Great Kilt. Now later in history, after 1746 and the defeat of the Jacobites, there was a deliberate effort to crush Gallic culture, and the wearing of the plaid was actually completely banned for a time. Now later on in history, around the Victorian era, the plaid became more militarised as it became known as the ceremonial dress for Scottish regiments, and its simplicity and practicality started to get lost. Around this era, we also see the rise of clan tartans, which didn't really exist prior to this. There would have been differences in patterns in different districts and areas of Scotland, but not really specific to clans like we see nowadays. There's a few theories on where the word tartan comes from, one of which is from an old Spanish word, tartana, which means a fine piece of cloth. For most of the plaid's existence, it would have had a simple checkered pattern, but one of its names, brechain in Ailey, the brech refers to it being speckled. Now the coloration of the wool either came from the natural colour of the sheep or was dyed using locally available plants, such as sorrel roots for red, gorse flowers for yellow, heather for purple, bracken for green, and old man's beard lichen for gingery orange. So this means that the colours of the plaids were often quite camouflaged, as they were literally made from the colours in the landscape. So with all that in mind, for this video I want to try source some plaids that are as close as I could get to the real historical thing. Now the dream is to one day go through the whole hand making and natural dyeing process to really understand it, but that's out of my means for the time being. So the next best thing for me was to try source some medium to heavyweight 100% wool fabric made in the UK with some sort of natural colours to them. And to be honest, even that wasn't very easy, as so much manufacturing is done overseas nowadays. But here are some examples of what I found. I've managed to get some sort of medium weight fabric here, and then one very heavyweight wool fabric. And over the past few months I've been testing them out in the field and spending the night in them. So before I cover its survival uses, let's cover some of the basics of core body temperature regulation so we can better understand how we can use the plaid to battle the elements. So in basic physics, there are three ways heat is lost: through radiation, conduction, and convection. And in the outdoors, this best translates as when we expose our skin on a still cold day, we experience heat loss through radiation. Chilly. Oh.
When we sit or lay down on the cold bare ground, we experience conduction as the earth sucks out our body heat. And when we get wet by the rain or sweat and moisture evaporates or is blown by the wind, we experience convection. So simply put, how to battle these in cold climates is to layer up, keep off the wind and wet, and stay off the ground. This applies to how you use your clothing and when creating shelter, and as I'll show you, we can use the plaid to affect all three of these. Now let's look at the first two, and here we must learn from the masters. What I mean by that is learning from the wildlife in your environment, a concept known as biomimicry. Take the red deer for example. Here is a piece of red deer winter hide, and from it we can decipher three defined layers. Closest to the skin is a layer of fine, soft, downy hair known as ground hair. This provides an insulative base layer for the animal, which also helps wick moisture away, keeping it warm. Then there is multiple layers of hair, which in the case of the red deer are hollow, thus trapping air, keeping it insulated. The third, outermost layer is known as the guard hairs and are for keeping off the wind and wet. They form a dense mat when flattened by the wind and rain, and these hairs also produce a small amount of oil that helps the water bead off, stopping the moisture reaching the skin while also allowing breathability. Now we can mimic the deer by how we use our clothing, both modern and historical, with a wick base layer, multiple layers of insulation, and finally a protective wet windy or shell layer. And you could argue that this outer shell layer is the most important for keeping you warm in bad weather, and it's here the plaid is primarily used. And just like the guard hairs of the red deer, we can mimic its function in both the plaid and modern jackets by having a densely woven fabric treated with a hydrophobic substance
And in the case of the plaid, traditionally they would have still retained the natural oil from the sheep, known as lanolin, and I have a whole video discussing this. And modern jackets are treated with synthetic proofing. Now let's compare these two shell layers to learn a bit more. Now in terms of comfort, well-fitting and lightweightness, modern jackets win hands down, and the technology for these keeps on getting better. But what can't they do? Well, they can only do one thing, and often the more complex something is, the more things there is for it to go wrong. They don't have much insulation by themselves, and even a small spark from a campfire can easily burn holes in them. Now in comparison, the plaid is bulky, heavy and cumbersome, but as I'll show you, it can be used in a ton of different ways, and its simplicity means reliability. It provides more insulation alone, and although generally less waterproof, as it's made from wool, it retains 80% of its insulative value even when it's soaking wet. Wool also swells when wet, providing a wind barrier. Wool is also fire retardant against your average sparks and embers, so you can rest easy next to your campfire. So finally, this brings us to how we can use the plaid as an outer garment and improvise shelter. Now, its biggest advantage is also one of its biggest disadvantages. A massive untailored cloth means it's multifunctional, but it also means it's an absolute pain in the arse to put on and takes quite a lot of practice to do it quickly. But here are 3 ways that you can gather the pleats and get it around your waist to get you started. The first way of putting it on is the most common one you see in demonstrations of the plaid, so I'll call it the classic method. Here you lay out your plaid flat on the ground and fold your pleats till you have a 4 legs distance of cloth either side of the gathered fabric. You then pass a belt or sash under the folds, lay on it so the pleats are just above your knees, and wrap the ends of the cloth evenly around you and secure around your waist with the belt. This method is great for when you're first learning and to demonstrate the gathering of the pleats, but it's not very practical on uneven or dirty ground, so it's difficult to do in the field. The next method is the standing method, where you stand holding the long edge of the cloth and fold the pleats with one hand and hold them together with the other. Then, by draping the plaid over your back, with practice you can wrap it around you and put on the belt. This method is much more practical in the field and can be faster, but it takes practice to do, and the pleats never look as neat as the classic method. The final method is you can customize your plaid by adding belt loops or drawstring along the line of your waist, so you can simply pass your belt through the loops and gather the pleats and hold it all in place. This is the most practical method for keeping it all together to transport when you're not wearing it, and it's easier to do with limited space compared to the classic method. But now it's tailored to only fit one size of person, and it's still not as practical as the standing method in some situations. Whatever way you gather the pleats or belt it, you should now look like this, and we can now look at the different configurations of wearing it. The first one I call the pockets and tail. Here you take a corner of the plaid in front of you, gather a small fold and tuck it in the belt behind you. Repeat for the other side. This gives you 2 large pockets in front, perfect for storing hats and gloves or dry tinder, and leaves a tail of fabric hanging down behind. It keeps cloth off the top half of your body, so it's good for hot weather or for sword fencing, but it does tend to drag along the ground behind you. Next method I call the cloak method, where you simply grab the tail from behind you and fling it over your head and shoulders to create a cloak. This is great for keeping off the wind and rain and getting cozy by the campfire. The many pleats at the back of the kilt also helps insulate you from the ground when sitting. The cloak can either be held in place with your hands or pinned in place to form a hood. The hood also helps break up the outline of your human form, aiding in camouflage. So let's put this to the test. Can you see me here? What about here? Or here? Let me know in the comments. The next method I call the shoulder method, where you grab the cloak an arm's distance on either side and bring it over your left shoulder and under your right armpit. You can then secure in place with a pin or leather tie. The pin is more decorative but will damage the fabric over time. The leather tie is less pretty but more practical and doesn't damage the fabric. This is my favourite method of wearing it, as it creates a large pocket on your back, useful for carrying light goods or extra clothing. It forms many layers of fabric that trap air on one shoulder, but at the same time still leaves half of your upper body exposed to prevent overheating. If you still get too hot, you can simply shift it off your shoulder to
to sit on your waist, keeping it out of the way. This is useful for energetic tasks such as collecting and preparing firewood. The final method of wearing it I call the Anorak Method. Starting with the plaid in the cloak configuration, untuck your front pockets from behind and tie these corners in an overhand knot. Then, with your hood still on, slip the knot over your head. This creates a secure hood and completely covers your upper body with a layer of wool fabric, with very large cozy sleeves. But in doing so, you'll lose all three of your useful pockets. So what about ways of sleeping in the plaid? Well, I've found you can use it on its own in the summertime, but for the rest of the year, it's best to think of it as an outer bivvy, layering extra wool blankets and animal skins to keep you warm in the colder months and also utilising sleeping next to a fire. So with that in mind, let's look at some sleeping methods. The first I'll call the bivvy method. First, make a mattress from animal skins or vegetation to reduce conduction. Then, lay out one body length of cloth on top of the mattress. You can create a pillow by rolling up the corners or folding in extra clothing. You can then pull the rest of the plaid over you, tucking it under your legs and side. This creates a double layer of fabric on top of your body with enough extra to cover your head to protect you from the biting midges. The next one I'll call the bivvy tarp method. You start the same as the bivvy method, but use the excess cloth to suspend above you on a ridge line and peg out the corners to create a simple shelter to keep the worst of the weather off you. This is best used with extra wool blankets, but there's still enough plaid on the bottom half to wrap a little around you. You can create attachments without damaging the cloth by using pine cones or smooth pebbles in the fabric with a clove hitch knot slipped over them. The final sleeping method I'll call the stuffed wrap method, which is useful if all you have to make the mattress from is loose leaves or vegetation. For this, lay out your plaid and on the top quarter of it create your mattress. Then, fold the plaid lengthways over it and tuck in the sides to stop the vegetation falling out. You can then lay on top of the leaves and fold the plaid widthways over you to create a double layer of fabric over your body, helping to trap more heat.
So there's a bunch of ways of using the plaid, and maybe you'll figure out some other methods yourself. Now, obviously, like everything, the plaid has its downsides. It's heavy, it's bulky, it's difficult to put on, it can be cumbersome and it catches the wind, and it's generally not as comfortable to wear as a lot of modern clothing. However, as I said at the beginning of the video, to me it's the jack of all trades when it comes to clothing and simple shelter. So sure, it's not as comfortable to wear as a modern jacket. It's not as warm and lightweight as a down sleeping bag. It's not as waterproof and easy to set up as a tarp. It's not as effective as a specialised backpack. But what it is one simple, rugged cloth that can do all of those things to at least a good enough degree that I thought it was worth making a whole video about. Now, historically, to hand weave such a massive bit of fabric would have been a major undertaking, so your plaid would have been a treasured item, out of necessity, if anything else, and it would have been maintained and passed down the generations to the point that when it was falling apart, it would be reused and recycled, and eventually, because it's made of natural material, it's going to biodegrade and go back to the soil. So in this way, I feel we can take a leaf from our ancestors' book to bring to the present day, to try buy high quality, locally made, natural, reliable and easy to maintain. So I'll try continue sourcing fabric that fits that criteria, and you can keep up to date with that as well as my reviews by subscribing to my website, or you can follow me on Instagram. Huge thanks to the Great Courses Plus for sponsoring this video. Generally, if it wasn't for that sponsor, I just couldn't have put as much time in the research, the filming and the sourcing of fabric for this video. So please do click that link below, as it ultimately helps the channel. Also, huge thanks to my patrons and supporters. You guys are my heroes. Thanks so much for watching, folks, and I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Cheers.